the measures that have been in place for so long. And although the biggest economic crisis that we will ever experience may not have affected you personally yet, it's only a matter of time that have been in place for so long also reach you and your loved ones. And although the biggest economic crisis that we will ever experience may not have affected you personally yet, I also think that it's only a matter of time that have been in place for so long also reach you properly, your loved ones, objectively informed about our current situation. Therefore, I would like to show you some easy verifiable facts that I think are essential. Less than a handful of mega corporations dominate every aspect of our lives. That may seem like an exaggeration, but from the breakfast that's on the table in the morning, to the mattress we sleep on at night, and everything we do, put on, or consume in between, all are largely dependent on these corporations. These are investment companies of immense proportions, and they manage the major money flows on Earth. They are the protagonists of the play which we are currently witnessing. So as not to take up too much of your time, I've summarized the most important information as briefly as possible. How does it work? Let's take as an example a company like PepsiCo, which is the parent company of many of the most popular soft drinks and snacks in the world. There appear to be many different competing brands, but they all come from the factories of a small number of corporations that together have a monopoly on the industry. Within the packaged food industry, there are a number of other major companies such as Unilever, the Coca-Cola Company, Mondelez, and Nestlé. On this image, you see that virtually every well-known brand in the packaged food industry belongs to one of these corporations. You can easily get this kind of information. You can verify it on the websites of the relevant brands or on Wikipedia. Companies of this size are usually publicly traded and have a board where the largest shareholders call the shots. On websites like Yahoo Finance, we can find detailed company information, including who the largest shareholders of these companies are. Let's take PepsiCo again as an example. We see that 73.14% of the shares are held by no less than 3,379 institutional investors. These include investment companies, mutual funds, insurance companies, banks, and in some cases, governments. Let's look at who the largest institutional investors of PepsiCo are. As you can see, just 10 out of the 3,379 investors account for almost 1/3 of all shares. The combined share capital of these top 10 has a value of approximately $60 billion. But of those 10 investors, 3 own more shares than the remaining 7. Let's remember their names and let's see who owns the most shares at the Coca-Cola Company, Pepsi's big competitor. We see that just like with PepsiCo, the majority of the shares are held by institutional investors. Let's look at the top 10 and start with the last one of them. 4 out of these 6 institutional investors we also saw at the last 6 of PepsiCo. These are Norton Trust, JP Morgan Chase, Geody Capital Management, and Wellington Management. Now, let's look at the 4 largest shareholders. 3 of these we also saw in the top 4 at PepsiCo. They are BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And there's another one, Berkshire Hathaway. These are the 4 largest investment companies on the planet. PepsiCo and Coca-Cola are anything but competitors. But also the other big companies that own many brands, such as Unilever, Mondelez, and Nestlé, are owned by the same small group of institutional investors, and you don't only find these names in the packaged food industry. For example, let's look up on Wikipedia what the largest companies are within the technology industry. Facebook owns WhatsApp and Instagram. Together with Twitter, they form the most popular social media platforms in the world. Alphabet is the parent company of all Google businesses, including YouTube and Gmail, but they are also the biggest sponsors and developers of Android, one of the 2 operating systems on which almost all smartphones and tablets in the world run. The other operating system is Apple's iOS. Finally, if we add Microsoft to the other three, we see that 4 companies produce the software that almost all computers, tablets and smartphones in the world depend on. Let's see who owns the most shares of these powerful companies. If we look at Facebook, we see that more than 80% of the shares are owned by institutional investors. These are the same names we saw in the food industry. Again, the same investors at the top. Then Twitter, which with Facebook and Instagram makes up the top 3. Amazingly, we see that the company is also owned by the same investors. We see them at Apple, but also with their big competitor, Microsoft. When we look at all the other companies that dominate the technology industry and build our computers, TVs, smartphones, and household appliances, we see the same big investors who own a majority of the shares. We see this within all industries around the world. And just to show you that I'm not exaggerating, I'll give you another example. Let's say we want to plan a vacation. On our computer or smartphone, we look for a cheap flight to the sun through websites like Skyscanner and Expedia, both of which belong to the same group of institutional investors. We fly with one of the many airlines, of which the majority of the shares are often owned by the same investors or by governments, like Air France-KLM. The aircraft we fly is in most cases a Boeing or an Airbus. Again, we see the same names. We look for a hotel or an apartment through Booking.com or Airbnb.com. Once we arrive at our destination, we go out for dinner, then we write a review on TripAdvisor. The same investors are at the basis of every aspect of our journey, and their power goes even much further, because even the kerosene that fuels the plane comes from one of their many oil companies and refineries. Just like the steel that the plane is made of comes from one of their many mining companies. This small club of investment companies, banks and mutual funds are also the largest shareholders in the primary industries where raw materials come from. If we look on Wikipedia for the largest mining companies in the world, we see that their shareholders are the same institutional investors we see everywhere else. The same goes for the largest agricultural companies in the world that our entire food industry depends on. For example, they own Bayer, the parent company of Monsanto, the world's largest seed producer, which produces 90% of all the cotton seed on Earth, as well as the majority of all other seeds. But these institutional investors are also the shareholders of the largest textile manufacturing companies in the world, and even the numerous popular clothing brands that turn the cotton into the clothes we wear are owned by the same group of investors. Whether we have the world's largest solar panel producers or the largest oil refineries, the shares are managed by the same companies. They own the tobacco companies, who produce all the popular tobacco brands in the world. But they also own all the major companies in the pharmaceutical industry and the scientific institutes that produce the drugs. They own the companies that produce our metals and raw materials, and the entire automobile, aircraft and arms industry where those metals and raw materials are processed. They own the companies that build our electronics. They own the big department stores and online marketplaces. And even the payment methods that we use to pay for their products. Because I want to keep my story as short as possible, I've decided to only show the tip of the iceberg. If you decide to investigate on your own, using the sources that you've just seen, then you will discover that even many of the most well-known insurance companies, banks, construction companies, telephone companies, restaurant chains, and cosmetic brands are owned by the same institutional investors we just saw. These institutional investors are, as I told you earlier, mainly investment companies, banks and insurance companies. They are in turn also owned by shareholders. Now, what is the most amazing thing? All of these institutional investors own each other's shares, and together they form an immense network that we can compare to a pyramid. The smaller institutional investors are owned by larger investors, who in turn belong to even larger investors. The visible top of this pyramid consists of only two companies, and we have seen their names many times by now. They are Vanguard and BlackRock. The power of these two companies is something we can barely imagine. Not only are they the largest institutional investors of every major company on Earth, they also own the other institutional investors of those companies, giving them a complete monopoly. According to a report by Bloomberg, one of the most respected institutions in the world in the field of financial data and analytics, experts expect that by 2028, both companies will collectively manage about $20 trillion in investments, and in the process will own almost everything on Earth. The same Bloomberg called BlackRock the fourth arm of government, because it is the only non-government entity that has a close relationship with the federal banks, also called the central banks. BlackRock not only lends money to the federal banks, but is also their principal advisor and the developer of the computer system that the federal banks use. Dozens of BlackRock employees had senior positions in the White House during the Bush and the Obama administrations, and currently under Joe Biden. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink is a welcome guest with many heads of state and politicians, and understandably so. He's the face of the company that pulls the strings. Yet Larry Fink does not pull the strings himself. In fact, BlackRock itself is owned by shareholders. And if we look at who those shareholders are, we come to a strange conclusion. We see that BlackRock's largest shareholder is Vanguard, and this is where it gets dark. Vanguard itself has a unique structure that makes it impossible to see who its shareholders or clients are. The elite who own Vanguard don't want anyone to know that they are the owners of the most powerful company on Earth. But of course, this is no secret to those who are willing to look into it. Reports by Oxfam and Bloomberg show that 1% of the world's population collectively owns more money than the other 99%. Indeed, Oxfam claims that as much as 82% of all the money earned in 2017 went to this 1% of people. Naturally, those who own the most powerful company on Earth would also be the richest among this 1%. In other words, they are part of the 0.001%. Forbes, the most well-known business magazine in the world, claims that by March 2020 there were some 2,075 billionaires. Oxfam's report showed that 2/3 of all these billionaires obtained their fortune through inheritances and monopolies. So this means that Vanguard is in the hands of the richest families on Earth. If we study their history, we discover that these families have always belonged to the top of the pyramid, some even well before the Industrial Revolution began. Because their history is so interesting and extensive, I will explain some more about them in the follow-up video that I'm currently working on. But in order not to elaborate too far, I will just point out that many of these families belong to royal bloodlines, and they are the founders of our banking system, the United Nations, and every industry in the world. These families never lost their power, but because of an increasing world population, they were forced to hide behind investment companies such as Vanguard, whose largest shareholders are the private funds and non-profit organizations of these families. To make the bigger picture more clear, I need to briefly explain something about these non-profit organizations. These are the links that connect the business community with politics and the media, allowing major conflicts of interest. At first glance, however, this is not too noticeable. Non-profits, also called foundations, are organizations that rely on donations, and they do not have to publish from whom they receive those donations. They can invest this money in whatever they want, and do not have to pay tax on their profits as long as those profits are reinvested in other projects that they are involved in. non-profits can move hundreds of billions of dollars from invisible investors. According to a report by the Australian government, this makes non-profit organizations ideal to finance terrorist groups and launder large sums of money. The foundations and funds of the families who are highest in the hierarchy of the 1% hide behind the scenes as much as possible. However, for cases that have a lot of publicity and attention, they use the foundations of philanthropist families that are lower in the ranking, but who are also extremely wealthy. In order to be concise, I will only highlight the 3 most important foundations in the world that connect all the industries in the world to each other. These are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundations of the controversial multi-billionaire George Soros, and the Clinton Foundation. A very brief introduction to give you an idea of the size of these types of foundations. According to the official website of the World Economic Forum, the Gates Foundation is the largest funder of the World Health Organization, after President Donald Trump halted the funding of the WHO by the US in 2020. This makes the Gates Foundation one of the most influential organizations in the world in the area of everything that relates to our health. The Gates Foundation has a close partnership with the 16 largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, including Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, BioNTech, and Bayer, and we have just seen who own the most shares of these companies. Bill Gates was anything but a poor computer nerd who made it to one of the richest people in the world, but he came from a philanthropic family that, just like himself, worked for the absolute elite. Bill is the founder of Microsoft, which is owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, and until recently Berkshire Hathaway. But at the same time, the Gates Foundation is the largest shareholder after BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street in Berkshire Hathaway, where he was even on the board for a while. We would spend hours if we considered everything the Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundations of George Soros, and the Clinton Foundation are involved in. But because they connect us with the next topic and with the current events, this brief introduction was important. I think the next topic should start with a question. A random person like myself, with very little experience in video editing, using an old laptop, can in 20 minutes objectively portray that only 2 companies have a total monopoly over all the industries in the world. So the natural question is, why didn't you hear about all of this in the media?
What? That's a good question.
Every day we have the choice between countless reports, documentaries, and television programs, and yet not one of them talks about this. Is it something not interesting enough? Or might there perhaps be other interests at play? The answer we get again from Wikipedia. About 90% of the international media is owned by 9 media conglomerates. The companies owned by these media conglomerates are too many to mention, so I'm just going to show you the most important brands that we all know. Viacom CBS is the parent company of, among others, all CBS channels, Paramount, where the most famous movies and series in the world come from, MTV, Comedy Central, Nickelodeon, the popular British Channel 5, and the popular Australian 10. Guess who the largest shareholders of Viacom CBS are? Before we look at the other major conglomerates, let's not forget to mention our extremely powerful streaming monopolists, Netflix and Amazon Prime, both of which belong to the same shareholders. Then AT&T, which is the parent company of Warner Brothers, HBO, Discovery Channel, CNN, Cartoon Network, TNT, DC, and many other well-known brands. Guess who the largest shareholders of AT&T are? The third one is the all-powerful News Corp. This company owns many of the most well-known national and regional newspapers, magazines, and TV channels in the US, the UK, and Australia. The shares of News Corp are owned by the American multi-billionaire Rupert Murdoch, and by the institutional investors we see everywhere else. News Corp's sister company is Fox Corporation, which is also one of the most powerful media conglomerates on Earth. Just like News Corp, it is owned by the Murdoch family and the usual investors. Then the Walt Disney Company, a conglomerate of unimaginable dimensions, with many subsidiaries such as Pixar, Marvel, 20th Century, Lucasfilm, ABC, National Geographic, and Hulu. Who are their biggest shareholders? Another powerful media conglomerate is Comcast. This is the parent company of NBC, DreamWorks, Universal, the Sky Group, Focus Features, Xfinity, and many other major media brands. As you would expect, their largest shareholders are Vanguard and BlackRock. I could go on for hours and show that in almost every country on Earth, the local media is in the hands of these kind of conglomerates, which in turn are owned by our institutional investors or by extremely rich and powerful elite families. In the UK, for example, virtually all popular newspapers and magazines are owned by the Daily Mail Group, Reach, and the aforementioned News Corp. In the Netherlands, the entire media is in the hands of the Persgroep, Mediahuis, and Bertelsmann. And in Germany, the entire media is either controlled by the German government, ProSiebenSat.1, Axel Springer, and again, Bertelsmann, which is also a conglomerate of unprecedented dimensions. Not only is this the parent company of the largest book publisher in the world, Penguin Random House, and owner and founder of BMG Music, Bertelsmann also controls a large part of the European media through their subsidiary RTL, a company with 67 TV channels, 10 streaming platforms, and 38 radio stations. Bertelsmann is owned by the ultra-rich Bertelsmann-Mohn family, who openly collaborated with the Nazis. Because of this, Reinhard Mohn was held as a prisoner of war in the US. Besides RTL, Bertelsmann also owns a large part of the French mainstream media. And together with Mediaset, the powerful Italian conglomerate of former President Berlusconi that controls the most important part of the Italian mainstream media, they also own all popular Spanish TV channels. Now, to complete the picture, let's look at where the news comes from that all these media outlets are feeding us on a daily basis. The various news media do not produce their news themselves, but use information and images from news agencies such as Reuters, the Dutch ANP, and the French AFP. These organizations are anything but independent. Reuters is owned by the powerful Canadian Thomson family. The ANP is owned by Dutch investor Kees Omen, and the AFP is largely financed by the French government. The main journalists and editors who work at our media or at these news agencies are affiliated with important journalistic organizations, such as the European Journalism Centre. These are one of the largest funders of media-related projects across Europe. They train journalists, produce study materials, give internships at, for example, the ANP, and work closely with the world's largest corporations such as Google and Facebook. For journalistic analysis and opinion, all the major media outlets in the world use Project Syndicate, the most powerful organization within its field. It supplies the 506 most important media outlets in 156 countries. Project Syndicate, plus an organization such as the European Journalism Centre, together with the news agencies, are the connecting link between all the different media outlets around the world. When newscasters read the news from their teleprompters, there is a good chance that the text comes from one of these organizations. As a result, the global media is often synchronized in its reporting.
We are concerned about trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms firms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 In September 2020, the European Journalism Center and Facebook set up a fund to support selected news organizations to do the reporting during the corona crisis. Let's see who the organizations are that, along with the news agencies, produce our news. At Project Syndicate, we see the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation, and the European Journalism Center. Then the European Journalism Center itself. Again, we see the Gates Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. And they also receive large donations from Facebook, Google, the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, and from the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The organizations that are at the heart of our information flow are funded by the non-profit organizations of the same elite who also controls the entire media. However, a part of our tax money goes to these organizations as well. Okay, I realize this was a lot of information to process, and believe me, I've made it as short as possible, and I've only used those examples that seem necessary to show you the overall picture, so you can understand the current situation better. It is an all-encompassing topic that can change our view on many historical events, but my goal is to inform you about the danger in which we presently find ourselves. There will be enough time for us to delve into the past, so let's talk about the current events now. The elite that controls every aspect of our lives, up to the information that we receive, depends on an unimaginably coordinated collaboration to keep all the different industries on Earth connected to each other, in order to ensure they all work in the elite's interests. This happens at the World Economic Forum, one of the most important organizations in the world. At its annual meeting in Davos, the CEOs of the largest companies on Earth gather along with heads of state, politicians, and other influential individuals and organizations like UNICEF and Greenpeace. Serving on the board of trustees are former US Vice President and climate change guru Al Gore, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, the President of the European Central Bank Christine Lagarde, the Director of CERN Fabiola Gianotti, the Queen of Jordan, the Director of the International Committee of the Red Cross Peter Maurer, and many other politicians and CEOs of the world's most influential companies. According to the WEF's official website, their annual membership fee ranges between 53,000 and 530,000 euros. But according to the WEF's year reports, around 71% of their total budget comes from its partners, who in this way pay for the membership of young politicians who cannot afford their own fee. Wikipedia reports the following. According to critics, the WEF is a business forum where the wealthiest companies can negotiate deals with other companies or with politicians. The purpose of the WEF for many of the participants would be personal gain instead of solving global problems. I don't like to make assumptions, but would there be so many problems on Earth if the key industry leaders, bankers and politicians since 1971 had gathered annually to solve our world's problems? Is it not strange that the world's leading environmental organizations have been meeting for 50 years with the CEOs of the most heavily polluting corporations while things just keep getting worse for our natural world? That these critics of the WEF are right soon becomes clear when we look at who the most important partners are that account for almost 71% of the WEF's budget. They are BlackRock, the Open Society Foundations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many other large corporations of whom Vanguard and BlackRock own the shares directly or indirectly. The president and founder of the WEF is Klaus Schwab, a German professor and businessman. In his book, The Great Reset, he describes in detail the plans of his organization. The coronavirus, according to him, is the excellent opportunity to literally reset our society in every regard. He calls this Build Back Better, and this slogan seems to be the motto of all globalist politicians in the world.
And it's now a historical moment, a crucial moment, to rebuild the future, to reset our policies.
And of course, we also want to work together on building back better.
You know, I said we're going to build back and we're going to build back better.
It's certainly a major crisis, but it also offers us a unique opportunity.
We must use this historical opportunity.
Together we can turn a crisis into an opportunity.
But this global pandemic has also created an opportunity to build back better.
To build back better later.
But also to build back better.
To build back a better world.
To build back better.
We can't just build back, we got to build back better.
And achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
And climate action is an essential part of that.
According to Schwab, our old society should be exchanged for a new one, in which countries give up their sovereignty to an all-encompassing world government, in which people own nothing but work for the state, in exchange for their housing, healthcare, and all their other basic needs. All of this is necessary, according to the WEF, because our modern consumer society, which the elite themselves imposed on us, can't keep going as it is. It's no longer sustainable. Schwab says in his book that we will never return to the old normal. And the WEF published a video that makes it clear that in 2030 we will own nothing, but we will be happy. You've probably heard some talk about the New World Order. The media wants us to believe that this is a topic for conspiracy theorists, although it has been talked about for generations by presidents such as George Bush Sr., Nelson Mandela, and Bill Clinton.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
After 1989, President Bush said, and it's a phrase that I often use myself, that we needed a new world order.
That the affirmative task we have now is to actually create a new world order.
But also by the world's most famous philanthropists such as Cecil Rhodes, David Rockefeller, Henry Kissinger, and even George Soros.
I think you need a new world order, that China has to be part of the process of creating it, and they have to buy in, they have to own it.
These important figures, who apart from Mandela, were all among the top of the elite when they were still alive, are not the only ones who dream about an all-powerful world government. In 2015, the UN presented its controversial Agenda 2030, which is almost identical to Klaus Schwab's Great Reset. In their own words, the UN, like Schwab, wants to ensure that by 2030, poverty, hunger, environmental pollution, and disease no longer exist on Earth. It sounds like a sympathetic plan, until you read the fine print. You see, the idea is that Agenda 2030 is going to be paid for by us, the citizens. And just as it is currently required of us that we give up our basic rights for the sake of public health, we will be demanded to give up our wealth in favor of poverty reduction. These are not conspiracy theories. You can read this for yourself on their official website. In short, it boils down to this. The The UN wants to take the tax money from all Western countries and give it to the mega corporations of the elite, who will be contracted to rebuild society. Globally, a completely new infrastructure is needed, because fossil fuels must be made a thing of the past, according to the UN. For this immense project, a world government is needed, says the UN. And the same UN takes it upon herself to be this global government. Just like Schwab, the UN also believes that a pandemic is the perfect opportunity to accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2030. It is worrisome that the WEF and the UN openly admit that they consider pandemics and other disasters as an opportunity to transform society, especially since we have seen that the elite have all the resources at their disposal to make us believe that there is a pandemic, and even to create one. So we certainly should not take these things lightly, and we should examine them carefully. And when we do that, we come across things that are even more troubling. On Friday, October 18, 2019, months before the pandemic was declared, a meeting was held at the Pierre Hotel in New York City for a select group of about 130 very important guests, including politicians and the world's most respected medics and pharmacists. The purpose of the meeting was to simulate the possible scenarios in the event of a global pandemic. This could be a coincidence, you might say. For this simulation, however, a coronavirus was used as an example. The simulation covered in detail how the coronavirus would develop and how they could only control this through the intensive collaboration of entire industries, governments, and government agencies. Once again, a new world order to save us from destruction. Does it surprise you when I tell you that this meeting, called Event 201, was organized by none other than the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Johns Hopkins Institute? This is not a conspiracy theory. Check the official website of Event 201 for yourself. Perhaps at this point, it will no longer surprise you that the German Robert Koch Institute, which like every national health institute in the world is closely linked to the WHO, which is funded by Bill Gates, created a similar simulation in 2012. As was the case during Event 201, the simulation assumed a coronavirus. This simulation assumed that in a Southeast Asian food market, a coronavirus would spread from animal to human. How coincidental, isn't it? In this simulation, it takes several weeks for the authorities to identify the virus, allowing it to spread worldwide. The simulation is made of the consecutive 3 years, in which there are lockdowns and economies are destroyed. But also the impact on society is simulated in all aspects, even the protests. I won't tire you with the details. In fact, you can download this analysis for yourself from the website of the German government. The last thing I want to show is an excerpt from a lecture that Belgian top virologist Mark van Ranst gave on January 22, 2019 at the Chatham House, a major non-profit organization in London, where important world leaders meet to discuss global issues. Winners of the Chatham House Prize include Hillary Clinton, Melinda Gates, and John Kerry. What Van Ranst is discussing is simply shocking. Van Ranst in fact explains how he has fooled the entire Belgian population during the swine flu through fear-mongering, out-of-context mortality rates, and media manipulation. He laughingly explains how he managed to impose the vaccine for the swine flu on the frightened Belgian population, a vaccine produced by the pharmaceutical companies he worked for.
Thank you very much, Ab. Thanks for the invitation. And I was asked to tell you about my experiences being the crisis manager, the flu commissioner for Belgium, and highlighting the communication. And then you have one opportunity to do it right. I mean, day one is so important. In day one, you start your communication with the press, with the people, and you have to do it right. I mean, you have to go for one voice, one message. In Belgium, they chose to appoint a non-politician to do that. I mean, I have no party affiliations, and that makes things a little bit, at that time at least, a little bit easier, because you're not attacked politically, majority, minority. That doesn't come into play, and that was a huge advantage. The second advantage is that you can play in Brussels the complete naive guy and get a lot more done than you would otherwise be able to do. You have to be omnipresent that first day or the first days, so that you attract the media attention. You make an agreement with them that you will tell them all, and if they call, you will pick up the phone. When you do that, then you can profit from these early days to get complete carpet coverage of the field, and they're not going to search for alternative voices there. And if you do that, that makes things a lot easier. These first weeks, that's easy street. When you have no opposition and then everybody needs news and they can come to you for news, you can bring quite a lot of neutral information, and it is picked up, and it is well, the news is brought the way you bring it, and that is you can only do that in the first couple of weeks or months. And then you have to say, okay, well, we will have H1N1 deaths. Of course, that would be unavoidable. I used there Sir Donaldson's quote, where he said that in the UK, by the peak of the epidemic, 40 people would die per day at the end of the summer. So 62 at that time million people in UK, 40 deaths a day. I worked it out for Belgium. That would be 7 deaths a day at the peak of the epidemic. I used that in the media. 7 Belgian flu deaths per day at the peak of the epidemic would be realistic. That is true in every year, even interpandemically. That is very, very conservative. However, talking about fatalities is important, because when you say that, people say, wow, what do you mean? People die because of influenza? And that was a necessary step to take. And then, of course, a couple of days later, you had the first H1N1 death in the country, and the scene was set and it was already talked about. And then you had to pick who is going to be vaccinated first. And then, well, women and children first, whatever. I mean, risk groups, they were important. And then I misused the fact that the top football soccer clubs in Belgium inappropriately and against all agreements vaccinated they made their soccer players priority people. So I said, I can use that. Because if the population really believes that this vaccine is so desirable that even the soccer players would be dishonest to get their vaccine, I said, okay, I can play with that. So I made a big fuss about this. This is Van Ranst is raving mad. But it worked.
The Chatham House organization is also funded by all major corporations of the elite, the Gates Foundation and the Open Society Foundations. We could talk for hours about the coronavirus, which has a survival rate of 99.98%, and about the incomprehensible measures that are destroying our society. Millions of entrepreneurs have lost their income. Countless elderly people have died in loneliness, isolated from their families. But I think we have reviewed enough facts that put the global COVID measures in a broader context, seen from the perspective of the elite. This extremely wealthy elite, collectively of tens of thousands of billions, has no problem whatsoever with the fact that more than 40% of the world's population has to live on less than $5.50 a day, or that millions of children are dying from the drinking water contaminated by them, or from malnutrition, or by their bullets and bombs. They just want to get more powerful. The elite have absolutely no intention to share their wealth with us. In fact, they are honest about their plans to take even the last bit from us, and those plans are being rolled out as I'm telling this. The underlying motives of the elite will not be explained in this episode, because for this we have to dive into history and discuss topics that are beyond our modern rational thinking. But for now you may understand well enough with the simple logic that a new world order, or an all-encompassing world government, is the only way for a small elite to retain its power over an ever-increasing world population. Companies like BlackRock and Vanguard do not benefit from national borders, import taxes, and real diversity. Only through fear and media manipulation can they maintain their grip on all of us. And I deliberately haven't even mentioned the inhumane blackmailing methods by which the elite keep their own most important minions in line. Because if this topic has aroused your curiosity, you will undoubtedly find out all about this in time. The elite have no intention to cure us from the countless diseases we've contracted from the toxic food they've produced, and from the environmental pollution which they have caused. After all, if we didn't get sick, the entire pharmaceutical industry would collapse. Nothing sells like fear is the motto of top virologists like Mark van Ranst. You will be amazed, as I was, when you discover that we have been warned countless times about this elite.
I think we're being run by maniacs. If anybody can put on paper what our government and the American government, etc., and the Russian, Chinese, what they are actually trying to do, I think they're all insane. But I'm liable to be put away as insane for expressing that. That's what's insane about it. I mean, don't you agree?
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silent, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The president is dead. Women here in shock, some have fainted. Men, Secret Service men standing by the emergency room, tears streaming down their face. There's only one word to describe the picture here, and that's grief, and much of it. It's official. As of just a few moments ago, the President of the United States is dead.
When you're talking about really elite levels, the name of the game is blackmail. That's what runs the whole system, basically. They want compromised people because they're easy to control. I'm not suicidal. I'm not suicidal.
The deep state is those people within the U.S. government that are career employees that cannot be fired by people that we elect by the Congress or the President. Are these people in control? Can they enact laws? Fuck yes. Can we fire these people? No. Can presidents fire them? No. It's designed that way so that political parties and political interests cannot affect the deep state. Do you understand the nightmare of our situation, people? It is no secret. It is as open as it can be. The deep state does control America. Wake up, people, please. God, use some common fucking sense. Thank you.
Something like 1984 could be happening. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time. In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. The sex instinct will be eradicated. There will be no loyalty except loyalty to the party. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.
With this video, I hope to reach you, to reduce the ever-increasing distance between us. Only when we are divided can the elite retain its power over us. The greatest fear of the elite is that we will realize what is really going on Earth. And and the only way the elite thinks they can prevent this from happening is through censorship, preventing human contact, the incessant framing of political opponents and those who think differently, and the use of brute force. The plans of the elite are clear, and so is the ruthless way in which they want to accomplish them. If we allow this to happen, a new society will be built on the ashes of what we once knew. A new society in which we will own nothing, not even a home of our own. The elite wants to make sure that between now and 2030, everything you now own will be theirs. For this, a devastating economic crisis is necessary. First, the middle class is attacked, which is the backbone of society. Entrepreneurs are forced to go into tremendous debt, which will ultimately cause them to lose all their possessions. After that, things will move quickly. Banks will fall, cash money will cease to exist, and the only way not to starve to death will be the acceptance of government support, which will include several conditions, such as the vaccination passport and giving up all private possessions. Because the entrepreneurs are the first to fall, many others won't immediately feel the crisis. The people remain divided among themselves until it is too late. This is not a doomsday scenario that I've made up. This is simply the Great Reset, the New World Order, which has been prepared for many generations, and which has been extensively tested in every communist dictatorship in the world. But this can also go a different direction, and instead of a great reset, we can cause a great awakening and create a world where no one has to go hungry, and where we can live in a sustainable way, in freedom with each other and with nature. This is not an idealistic daydream. There have always been forces that have sought to break the power of the elite, but until recently, our means of communication were always insufficient to get a mass network in motion. The elite have always kept us in ignorance about the discoveries of geniuses such as Tesla, who was far advanced in the field of clean, free energy, or Dr. Rife, who used radio waves to cure at least 16 terminal cancer patients before he, just as Tesla, died in a suspicious manner. Or Henry Ford, who in 1941 had already made a car out of bioplastic that proved stronger than steel. The elite have hidden countless such techniques from us because they form a threat to their monopolies in every industry. These were techniques that would have given us freedoms and put the elite's power at risk, which is based on our fear and dependence on their projects. These are not conspiracy theories, but facts. What I am saying is that a world of new possibilities is opening up for all of us, where there is no poverty, no pollution, diseases, or wars, and in which governments work for the welfare of the people rather than the other way around. Countless ailments that provide the pharma industry with hundreds of billions of dollars will be cured. No one will have to work their ass off to live a dignified life. People will no longer live in fear because of the lies of the media, the pharma industry, the climate lobbies, and politicians. It's all on the horizon, but we have to go through the storm first and recognize what the real problem is in our society. I want to thank you for listening to me, and I hope someday, in freedom, together we'll reflect back on this unique moment in history. There is still so much to tell, but we will save the rest for later. This video was only intended as an introduction. This is where our journey starts. and it will be a difficult one, but we will undertake it together, and we will help each other get up when we fall. We will not be afraid. We are the 99%. Dear fellow human, I think by now you have the feeling that something is not right about our current situation. But I also think that the many ill-founded conspiracy theories may have caused you to distance yourself from both the media scaremongering and from those who spread the conspiracy theories. Still, I hope you will listen to me for a moment, because as you watch this video, hundreds of millions of people worldwide are falling into poverty because of the measures that have been in place for so long. And although the biggest economic crisis that we will ever experience may not have affected you personally yet,
It's only natural to dwell on what we've missed. Big celebrations, dinner with
各位韭菜同胞，大家好，我是小明教授。今天我来给你讲那些大 V 不敢讲，就算敢讲，他们也讲不了的事情。这是之前我们已经提到过美国的人口贩卖、乌克兰的人口贩卖。今天我们来谈中国的人口贩卖。你可能觉得，哎呀，是个人他都知道中国有人口贩卖，还用你来说？但是我感觉这个话题完全没有被调查。比如，人口贩卖在中国是如何运作的？谁在运作？他们是怎么躲过政府监督的？他们是怎么把人口贩卖做成国际化的产业链的？这些你不好奇吗？相信啊，大家对徐州铁链母亲已经不陌生了。她被拐卖到了一个贫困地区，生了至少8个小孩，其中绝大多数的女孩不知所踪。之前我在抖音做过短片，简单的表达过我对这个事情的看法。想知道的话呢，可以跟踪我的抖音国际版账号。我其中一个观点就是，这是一个贫困县的人，他哪里来的钱去买人口？如果这个被拐卖来的人是免费来的，没有任何的利益瓜葛，为什么当地政府要尽全力去保护一个没有钱没有权势的村民呢？现在网上的智障都在说，哎呀，那是因为他们当地有一个高官也参与强奸了这个母亲，所以呢他们想把这个事情压下来。但我觉得这个说法完全不足以说明任何问题，因为政府它掌控国家的媒体，它掌控网络媒体，它掌控司法机构，他们完全可以把所有的罪名啊全部归咎在这个没文化、没钱、没势力的村民上面。反正呢，他说的话也传不出去，也没人信他，没人鸟他。中共又不是没做过这个事情，是吗？什么都是临时工的错。所以中国政府他有什么好怕的呢？所以说到这里，我想说的只有一件事情，肯定很多韭菜同胞也想到这件事情，就是中国的人口贩卖有政府直接参与，甚至可以说就是政府直接亲自策划、亲自部署的。我也想知道中国人口贩卖的细节，比如啊，之前我们谈论了美国和乌克兰人口贩卖的细节，比如美国政府的儿童寄养系统就是人口贩卖的基地，这一点在受害人采访和美国的官方文件都能证明。但中国就不一样了，因为中国的消息很闭塞，你可能觉得，哎呀，中国是独裁国家，消息闭塞是肯定的。但是在经过深入了解后，我发现整个亚洲地区的人口贩卖数据全部都很闭塞，日本、韩国、柬埔寨、越南全部都是这样的。而且消息最闭塞的还不是中国，居然是台湾啊！这句话不是我说的，是我花了12美元阅读到的一个东亚人口贩卖的研究上写到的。而这个研究有37页，揭露了很多人口贩卖的细节，但是还有很多的事情我们不了解啊。研究人员在这里写到啊，因为台湾它关于人口贩卖的数据几乎没有，所以呢，这些学者根本就没有把台湾做入这次研究的范围之内。那为什么东亚地区消息这么闭塞呢？根据我的推测，原因多半是因为亚洲的人口贩卖有一个很强大的保护伞，那就是中国。我们先描述一下中国人口贩卖的概况吧。根据联合国发布的报告，中国是东亚地区贩卖人口的硅谷，也就是说，中国是人口贩卖的货物来源、中转站和目的地。受害者呢，绝大多数是妇女和小屁孩。而中国的人口贩卖是通过什么形式做到的呢？就是通过移民和迁徙，就是那些从其他国家进入中国的移民，很多都是以移民为掩护被买卖来的。那具体有多少人是被贩卖来的呢？不知道，只知道啊，其中30%到40%的人是通过地下黑市管道来的，其中多少人是被贩卖来的，而不是偷渡来的，这个完全没有办法考证。很多的贩卖都在大众的眼皮底下发生，比如啊，中国很津津乐道的啊，娶越南老婆啊，大家都在抱怨啊，中国女人很物质啊，不贤惠，还要很多钱。但是呢，越南老婆 就很贤惠也很便宜，然后很多人把这个事情当成一个正能量来宣传宣传越南老婆多好，但是他们不知道那些所谓的便宜的越南老婆基本上是被人口贩子拐卖过来的，而且最可怕的事情是他们是被自己的亲人拐卖过来的。墙内的妓女、菲律宾佣人几乎全部都来自人口贩卖产业。你有没有好奇为什么有些女人她会从乌克兰、俄罗斯那么远专门跑到中国来当妓女？因为他们是被拐卖来的。早在2000年的时候中国买老婆需要花1250到2500美元，而人口贩子拐卖一个女人的成本最高只需要800美元，而这800美元成本还可以通过其他方式挣回来，比如强迫她卖淫，不听话的时候杀掉，器官拿去卖几乎没有任何的成本。很多从朝鲜跑到中国的女人也不幸被迫成为了中国某些男人的私人财产，他们呢会被迫生孩子当妓女挣钱，不然的话就会被遣返。大家都知道遣返回朝鲜那就是穿钢丝，然后到沙滩上面直接对他们很惨。那中国人口贩卖的基地在哪里呢？中国人口贩卖的基地在哪儿呢？河南省。而河南省的货源除了来自于河南省本身以外，一般来自于其他比较贫困的地区，比如四川、云南还有甘肃这些地方。因为只要有贫穷有穷人，就有很多可以被拐卖的人。所以看到这里你就知道了为什么中国这么有钱，世界第2大经济体，有些地区是这么的贫困的都不像话，这些都是故意设计成这样的。那好，接下来就是我的猜测结合之前的一些信息我们知道人口贩卖活动在人流量聚集的时候是最旺盛的，比如迪士尼乐园是人口贩卖圣地，超级碗比赛它也是人口贩卖的盛事。而中国人流量最旺盛的时候是什么时候呢？每年的春运。我怀疑人口贩子每年利用春运可以把货物，也就是贩卖的人口混在人群当中大量运输，所以每年春节对普通人来说可能是回家过年的喜事，但是对人贩子来说可能就是每年最挣钱的时候。好，那我想探究中国政府到底有没有参与人口贩卖，这个没有直接证据，但是很多事情可以给我们答案。时间回到2011年当时中国出了一个新的网络平台叫微博很多没见过世面的韭菜同胞就特别喜欢在微博上到处乱发东西。很多人呢就随手拍到了儿童乞讨的照片，就说你看这些儿童太可怜了，他们都残了，在街上乞讨。另外的韭菜同胞就发现不对这些儿童他们哪里来的？国家都不管的吗？他们就继续的挖掘，很快的发现那些儿童基本上都是被拐卖来的，他们会被弄残，就博取同情，然后呢到街上去乞讨，乞讨到的钱他们自己拿不到，全部都是上面那些人口贩子们就分了。于是愤怒的韭菜同胞到处就随手拍儿童乞讨的照片，到微博上一起找人，然后这就变成了当时轰动一时的打拐运动。打拐就是打击拐卖儿童的简称。这是一件好事因为当时的政府几乎不需要花费太多的资源，就可以拯救很多被拐卖的儿童，打击很多人口贩卖的窝点。甚至很多人认为满嘴瞎话没有良心的官媒人民日报当时都发表了文章，大肆的称赞了这次微博打拐运动，说整个社会动用了团结的力量寻找了失踪的儿童。你发现没有，微博打拐它就是 Q 运动的非阴谋论版本就是韭菜呢团结起来，动用自己的力量去传播信息，用自己的力量去解决问题，而不是依赖政府。事情进展得很顺利但是突然某一天微博打拐就突然不是一件好事情了，就很多攻击微博打拐的文章和言论就出现了。到最后呢，政府干脆就明令禁止不要微博打拐了。你这么一看，好像政府很不想那些儿童获救。你可能觉得不是，那是政府不想麻烦韭菜，或者呢怕这个韭菜滥用权力他们不懂法律巴拉巴拉巴拉之类的，政府想通过正当手段去解决那些被拐卖的儿童。那好，我们可以看一下政府是如何应对人口拐卖的。在微博上呢，有个叫陈世渠的警官，他专门负责人口拐卖的事情，700多万的粉丝。好，这个警官他出现在了一篇2018年的新闻报道，他自己说各地政府几乎没有儿童拐卖的部门。当时陈警官说，他 的部门只有5个人，然后他又去其他部门又借了5个人，所以中国打击人口贩卖部门不仅没有人，更没有钱啊！就算人救回来了，如何安置他们，让他们重新回归社会，那都是很大的难题啊！但是你相比之下，中共部门内负责请人喝茶的国保他们的人数就很多了，工资也相当的高，所以国家的钱都跑去哪里了呢？你自己想一下吧。好，我们来看这个陈警官，我觉得他非常的有问题，非常有可能就是打拐界的大外宣，就表面上打拐，实际上呢就是在帮助管理人口贩卖。他从来没有指出过人口贩卖的真正问题啊，比如这篇文章就说这个中国的人口贩卖每年已经不到100次了，哇，失踪儿童找回率97%呀，好棒棒啊！这个傻逼还说人口贩卖无法被禁止的主要原因是因为总会有人去买儿童。 What？ 这种屁话完全就是在故意逃避政府的责任。而且这里还有个地方我感觉非常的有问题，就是说他们要建立全国的基因库，帮助找回失踪儿童听起来好像挺高科技的但是这个其实所谓的基因库根本就不能帮助找回失踪儿童，他们只能帮助那些已经被找回来的失踪儿童鉴定他们的父母是谁，而能被找回来的儿童只是极少部分。所以这个 DNA 库的主要作用是什么呢？就是给所有人建立一个生物识别资料，就方便匹配血型和器官，因为大人和小孩的 DNA 都会被收集太牛逼了。
大家好，欢迎大家来到美国奥启宏盛财富通。今天我们要跟大家来聊一聊，在美国买保险是否真的可以得到赔偿。首先呢，我们要了解一下美国的保险公司会不会倒闭。在理论上来说，美国的保险公司不仅仅是人寿保险、汽车、房屋、健康和其他的商业保险公司，在理论上都是可以倒闭的，并没有一个国家的法律或者是联邦的法律来保证所有的保险公司。所以呢，我们在美国购买人寿保险的时候，一定要了解你的保险公司在财务上是不是有这个能力将来来支付你的保险的索赔。在购买人寿保险的时候，虽然没有一个联邦的相当于银行这样一个 FDIC 的保障，可是呢，美国50个州基本上都有州一级的 Guarantee Association， 起到的作用是什么呢？就是只要你在这个州要做这样的生意，不管是汽车、房屋、医疗以及其他的商业保险，特别是人寿保险，都有这样一些基本的保障。以加州为例，我们加州这个 Guarantee Association 呢，它对每一个人在这个公司的每一张保单，一般来讲它最高只能保证到30万的面额，也就是30万的人寿保险。现金价值呢，通常它会保证到10万美金。这样一些保障呢，实际上是很小的。还有一点呢，我们要了解你在购买人寿保险的时候有哪些条款是不赔的。在我从事人寿保险32年的经验当中，我们看到很多不同种类的保险所包含的不赔付的一些条款。不保的内容一般来说分为5大类。第一类是自杀条款。美国的保单呢，它基本上是定为2年之内不能自杀，是指的保单的生效期开始计算2年之内不能自杀。如果第3年自杀，一般来说你是会得到赔偿的。在2年之内发生自杀，保单是不会赔死亡赔付，但是所交的保费或者加上保费的利息会退还给客人。第二种情形呢，就是高风险的一些活动，攀岩、深度潜水，其他的高风险的这些运动有可能不包含在保单的这个范围以内。那大部分的情况下，保单也会注明写清楚的。有的保险公司他会说某一项高风险的运动不包含，或者是说过了多少年之后它可以包含， 或者是他加保费，这种情况下呢，你一定要读每一份保单，因为每个公司的基本情况是不一样的。第三种是非法行为，非法行为包含比如说出售毒品、谋杀，其他的一些法律所不认可的一些行为。那么这些行为也有可能不包含在保单的这个范围以内。还有一种情况就是有可能政治因素受到迫害，或者是有可能不同的国家对某些行为是否是合法或者是否是非法都有不同的解释。我们曾经有过客人在亚洲某一个国家被政府判了死刑，那么这种情况下呢，在美国有可能是会赔的，因为美国并没有认为那项行为是非法行为，跟各个国家的法律以及保单所包含的内容都是不一样的。再有就是关于航空方面的一些行为比如说像这个私人飞机或者是私人的这个飞行员 private pilot， 大部分的保险公司目前呢是没有把这一条呢作为例外不赔的，只是在申请的时候你要写明你有这个开私人飞机的这种行为。那大部分的公司可能会加价，或者是呢给你一个选择，就是在几年之内发生事情他们不赔付。总而言之，这种跟航空相关的一些行为是不是赔付，也要查询那一家保险公司的合约。但有一点可以肯定，就是商业的这个飞机，你如果作为买票上飞机的乘客发生事情，这种情况下是一定会赔的。最后一项就是关于战争，战争情况下保单是不是会赔付？其实这个问题美国历史上也争论了几十年。在80年代末90年代初的时候，各家保险公司都已经把这个不可抗拒的力量以及呢战争这两种情况做了非常大的调整。现在的保单很难看到还有战争发生不赔的情况。这就是我们今天所 cover 的全部内容。谢谢大家，也希望大家点赞、转发、订阅。
Hello， 姐啊，我最近一直在为孩子的数学发愁。这国外的学前和小学的数学教育难度比国内简单太多了，这以后哪比得过人家呀？
这确实是个问题啊，找个学习班给孩子补一下吧。
我也想啊，这附近也没有合适的机构，远一点的孩子上课也不方便。
我推荐掌门少儿数理思维直播课，大品牌黄磊代言的，上课也方便，在家用电脑 Pad 就能学。现在特惠活动，0元就能领1节直播课加4节速算技巧 AI 课，
这么划算，在哪能报名啊？
点击视频下方链接就能报名啦。
爱上思考，乐于表达，就上掌门少儿小班课。
而你再想一下，人口贩卖其中一个利润来源就是器官移植，中国又是世界上最大的器官移植国家。好，所以中国政府部门没有资源，没有能力去处理人口拐卖的事情。我们来看一下他们如何处置被抓到的人口贩子啊。根据联合国资料调查，2010年中国有3343人被逮捕，4422个人因为人口贩卖的问题被起诉，多少人被定罪了呢？这上面没有讲。但是有意思的事情是，这些数字每年都在降低。2013年只有1849个人被捕，2395个人被起诉，其中1978个人被定罪，但这里没有说被判多少年，我想大概是3到5年，甚至几个月都有。好，如果你小时候头被驴蛋蛋夹过，你看到这里可能会觉得，哇，中国的人口贩卖越来越少了，中国越来越好了。 但实际上根据官方的数据，中国每年失踪人口至少100万，特别是在 DNA 库、摄像头、人脸识别、手机定位，还有什么大数据、5G、AI 监控，这全方位的监控下产生的数字。但只要你不是小粉红那种级别的头脑，你可能会觉得说，哎呀，这些技术那就是用来监控维稳的，不是用来找失踪人口的。你只答对了一半。根据我的优秀判断，实际情况应该更吓人。维稳只是这些技术的副作用，它们的主要作用是什么呢？精确跟踪所有目标人口，让政府可以随时掌控任何想要拐卖的目标的动向，先从DNA 库找到符合条件的人，然后通过监控系统马上找到这个人的位置。所以中国人他就变成什么了？变成了一个农场里面随时可以被抓到的猎物。但毕竟这些是网上找来的消息，跟实际情况比肯定是有一些差距的。当然我也没有办法去做实地考证和调查，但我没有想到的事情是，居然有人做过实地调查。哇，他不想活了吧？这里我找到了一篇南都周刊总编辑常平写的文章他在中国呢长期跟踪调查中国人口贩卖的情况。这篇文章标题就是中国政府在人口贩卖中的角色。哇，好牛逼啊！也就是说经过他的第一手调查，他发现政府就是人口贩卖的主要团伙和主导人。比如他说到，在人口贩卖严重的地区，警察都不会去救人，更不会立案，只有到了上级要做些面子工程、强制要求的时候，警察才会非常不情愿的装个样子救一下。就是在这种程度的资源投入下，宜兴市这一个小地方在10年间也救出了7000多个人。而那些警察他们平常的工作也不是去什么打击犯罪，而是去积极的维护那些人口贩卖网络的。这篇文章提到了电影《盲山》这是一部揭露中国人口贩卖的电影。电影中的重庆警方要去拯救陕西的被拐卖的人口，但是呢，他们没有直接跟陕西的警方合作。很多人不理解为什么，原因就是因为如果重庆警方要跟当地警方合作，当地警方就会把消息泄露给他们的人贩子团伙。但是保密工作即便是做到这种程度，很多时候也无法成功拯救那些被拐卖的人口。你现在应该知道这是为什么了。深层政府他的眼线到处都是，甚至还有一些荒唐的事情会发生。比如那些要去拯救被贩卖人口的警察，他们会向那些受害人索要解救费，你不给钱我就不救你。哇，我操他妈的你以为这就更糟糕了？根本不是。就是在警察局里面，大多数的失踪儿童案件根本都不会记录，就算你运气好记录了，也根本不会立案你说他们可能不想管这些事情，他们屁事太多了，而且他们连现场的监控录像都根本不会提供。为什么警察不提供录像呢？因为我刚才说了，那些监控设备是用来打猎的，不是用来找人的。如果给你看监控，你把人贩子认出来了，以后那个人贩子怎么帮政府拐卖人口更吓人的是什么？就有些人他偶然看到了自己孩子被拐走的监控录像，发现是被熟人抱走了，而之后这个熟人没有受到任何的惩罚。不可能有惩罚嘛，因为他们就是一伙的嘛。那有多少小孩是被熟人拐走的呢？那就根据受害人的采访，还有刚才我提到的那个研究里面，他们都说了同样的事情，就是大多数的小孩都是被熟人拐走的。你可能在网上看到过很多那种录像就是不知道哪里冒出来一个陌生人他们突然就从那里冒出来，然后就把孩子抱走了。那些录像都是为了误导普通人，让大多数人觉得呢，最大的威胁是来自于陌生人，但其实最大的威胁是来自你们身边的人。所以在中国提到人口贩卖的事情，那一定要把焦点集中在这个失踪人口回归家庭，和家人一起过上幸福快乐的日子这种感人故事，绝对不能提政府在人口贩卖当中起到的作用。看到这里你会不会觉得很奇怪？就是你说墙内的人他们不敢说中共拐卖人口那还可以理解。那么那些墙外的所谓的反共大 V 频道，他们怎么也不说中共拐卖人口呢？我只有想到2种可能。第一个就是他们其实也没有想到那个方面去，这个超出了他们的认知。那第二个原因就是他们不敢说他们不敢说，你看他们干嘛？比如典型的例子就是什么公子沈文昭嘛你让他们说一下中国政府在人口贩卖当中起到的作用，你看他们能说出什么狗屁来所以到目前为止，我们已经可以通过各种消息总结出来，就是中共它主导了中国的人口贩卖活动，并且把人口贩卖发展成了一个产业链。这个产业链不仅在国内很发达，甚至延伸到了周边的国家和地区。中国不仅变成了输出国、消费国，还成为了中转国。 而且正因为政府是幕后黑手，所以他把政府和国家的制度设计成了非常有利于人口贩卖的形式。比如刚才提到的，故意设立一个空壳部门用来打击人口贩卖啊，这是变相的不去打击人口贩卖。人口贩子他抓到了不起诉，警察不受理不立案，媒体不报道，同时利用国家的资源打压那些试图揭露人口贩卖真相的人，同时他们建立 DNA 库和监控系统，帮助政府随时找到要拐卖的目标，同时呢让一些地区保持贫困，增加留守儿童的数量，方便人口贩子随时去拐卖那些没有家长监控的小孩。所以现在你能理解为什么中国所有的经济政策、政治政策、什么社会资源分配都是在巩固阶级固化，制造贫富差距，让穷人越来越穷，一直很穷，没有机会翻身。这些制度就是为了人口拐卖而设计的，让穷人永远受到有钱人的控制，让他们永远没有机会翻身。而且不只是中国，所有的国家都是这么做的。比如韩国和日本啊，大家都知道日本色情行业很发达，但你知不知道色情行业里面多数的人他都不是来自日本的。韩国的娱乐圈也是这么运作的。好，远的不谈，我们现在谈一下各个国家的移民政策。大家都知道移民啊是很难的啊，你不可能作为什么民工劳动力然后就去移民拿绿卡拿签证了。基本上大多数国家都要求啊，你有学位去留学，有很好的工作，读个什么博士研究生你才能够移民。但是呢，很多国家它本身劳动力极度短缺，所以他们必须要劳动力做很多事情。当我说到劳动力，就可能包括一般的劳动力，还有一些什么妓女啊什么的之类的劳动力。那些劳动力从哪里来呢？人口贩卖。那既然很多国家缺劳动力，他们为什么不大肆开放劳动力签证呢？因为开放劳动力签证的话，那些劳动力就可以合法的进入这个国家。那如果他们是合法的来，人口贩子就不能控制那些底层的人民了，政府就挣不到钱，不能剥削了。你想一下，如果那个人是个非法的劳动力，你想随便做什么事情都可以，没有人管的啊！如果你感兴趣的话呢，可以去了解一下台湾外籍劳工的遭遇和待遇啊，我可以专门做一集讲了，但是今天我们不讲这个事情。看到这里呢，可能会有些人会怀疑说啊，不至于吧，你说的太夸张了，人口贩卖对于政府真的有这么重要吗？很多人不知道，人口贩卖是深层政府的核心利益。大多数人不了解这个话题，我们今天也不是主要讨论这个问题的，但是我可以简单的说一下，就是世界上有一个很强大的势力，他们呢需要大量的儿童和妇女来满足他们的一些特定的需求，但是他们不能直接偷和抢人，因为人知道了是会反抗的，所以他们设计了一系列的制度和规则来隐藏他们拐卖人口的行为。而他们就非常害怕普通人会知道他们如何拐卖人口的啊！但是研究调查做到这里，我还是非常的不满意，因为没有任何人能够查到人口贩卖的运作细节。研究人口贩卖的学者他们查不出来，一线的记者他们也没有查出来，新闻也不报，政府部门刻意隐瞒。所以这里我们只能合理推测猜测啊，这个人口贩卖大概是怎么运作的。首先呢，人口贩卖要分很多等级，对吧？最底层的那一级啊，就是打手啊，就是那些负责抱小孩骗人的人，这群人应该是有直接顶头上司的，我不知道他们是跟谁沟通的，但是政府部门肯定有跟他们沟通的渠道啊，多半是警察部门、社会福利部门、孤儿院之类的部门。然后呢，他们会把小孩交给仓库啊，这是负责管理和养那些被拐卖人口的地方。那里面呢会有很多人其他的角色啊，这些我们暂时都不清楚。而这些人他们绝对是有特定的社区和地盘的划分的，他们会跟中国政府直接沟通，然后把资金都交给中国政府来运作啊，就来洗钱啊，怎么样。而中国政府会把这些钱用在他们想用的地方啊，多半放在什么瑞士银行啊、什么美国的资产那些地方去了。而警察部门他们平常呢就是帮助维护人口贩卖这个网络的，但目前不知道他们是如何跟这些团伙沟通并且联系的，因为根据目前的情况来看啊，这些人口贩卖网络非常大，基本上相当于是亚洲人口贩卖的亚马逊或者淘宝。他们不仅负责国内的运输、进货、出货、财政管理，还要负责国际的运输和调度。怎么想这个工作量都是很大的事情，政府不可能找不到线索。而这整个人口贩卖产业最高的可能就要追溯到中国的深层政府，就是中国掌握权力的那些家族。毕竟人口贩卖这么挣钱的事情，肯定是中共里面最贪婪的那几个家族来做的。在毫无证据的情况下，我以直觉来猜，感觉应该是江派的人做的啊，毕竟他们就是负责器官产业的，对吧？法轮功就是他们摘的嘛。器官产业跟人口贩卖是挂钩的产业，加上江蛤蟆曾经非常自豪的说啊，什么闷声大发财，所以我判断人口贩卖这个行业非常适合江蛤蟆的个性。而经过一些调查，我也发现了中国人口贩卖在国际 际上的联系啊，比如大家都知道的红黄蓝幼儿园，之前呢被爆出是专门为某些权贵提供儿童的地方，还有很多起儿童相关的丑闻。这个幼儿园它在纽约上市了，猜一下这个公司它的股东有哪些人呢？里面有摩根集团和黑石集团。对，一点都不意外，那些惯犯又出现在了我们的名单上面。看到这里，很多人会想，那是不是人口贩卖它就管不了了？毕竟韭菜没有办法反抗中共嘛。但其实我发现，在这个绝望的情形当中，还有那么一丝的希望。如果看到国务院发表了一个文件，上面写到2021年到2030年坚决打击人口贩卖的计划，我仔细读了一下文件，那里面呢大多数都是空话和屁话。但很有意思的事情就是，2021年刚好是小红楼事件被曝光的时候，而今年是铁链母亲被曝光的时候，人口贩卖又成为了热点话题。大家都知道啊，中共封锁信息的力度，有些话题他不想放出来，你是绝对不可能放出来的。所以我非常相信，现在中共内部肯定有一股力量正在试图介入人口贩卖，而你能做到的事情，就是让你身边的人意识到，政府才是人口贩卖的元凶，不是那些贫困的村民，也不是那些买人口的智障。所以你不要去关注什么铁链母亲，你要去关注铁链母亲为什么会成为铁链母亲。那这就是今天的影片。如果你想知道更多的真相和真相的细节，可以加入我的电报频道。想参与讨论，可以加入我的电报群或者 Discord 群。开车坐地铁的时候可以听我的播客节目，连接全部都在下面的描述栏里面。我们下次再见吧，拜拜。